Thalen's claws hovered over the emergency interrupt key, frozen by what he was hearing. The human transmission had been marked routine, colonial logistics chatter, the kind his algorithms filtered through 1,000 times per shift. But the voice on the other end wasn't discussing supply routes. It was whispering. Threshold, we have visual confirmation. Repeat, visual confirmation of veil movement, Sector 773. They're not drifting anymore. There. Static consumed the rest, then nothing. Thalen replayed it 3 times, each iteration sending ice deeper into his blood. The coordinates placed the transmission origin far inside established space, well beyond the frontier zones where signals occasionally went dark from equipment failure or pirate activity. This was a core colony, 16,000 inhabitants, and the human on that channel had sounded terrified. He pulled up the sector map, watching as his system overlaid recent comm traffic. 17 other human colonies in adjacent sectors, all silent for the past 6 days. He'd attributed it to a localized network failure. Now he wasn't sure. Thalen, Overseer Kyrus's voice crackled through his earpiece. Status report, you're 3 minutes past check-in. Thalen closed the audio file, his mind still churning. Apologies, Overseer. Minor signal anomaly, nothing critical. A pause. See that it stays that way. The War Council wants updated human fleet movements by end of shift. They're convinced the humans are preparing another expansion push. Understood. Thalen kept his voice neutral, professional. He waited until Kyrus disconnected before pulling the transmission back up. The humans weren't expanding. They'd stopped 18 months ago, their borders crystallizing into an impenetrable shell of defensive stations and patrol fleets. The Roían intelligence community had interpreted it as consolidation before a major offensive. But what if they'd been wrong? What if humanity had stopped expanding because they'd found something that made territorial ambition irrelevant? Thalen's fingers moved across the console, querying the deep archive for any mention of veil in human transmissions. The search returned nothing. Either the term was too new, too classified, or his people had been filtering it out as irrelevant noise. He sat back, staring at the silent sector map. 17 colonies, 16,000 people, gone quiet. The smart thing would be to file this in his report. Let the chain of command decide if it warranted investigation. The safe thing would be to forget he'd heard that transmission at all, to trust that if it mattered, someone with more authority would act. But Thalen had spent 8 years monitoring human communications, learning their linguistic patterns, their cultural tics, their fears. And the voice on that transmission hadn't been afraid of the Roíans. It had been afraid of something else entirely. He pulled up navigation protocols and began plotting a course to the edge of human space. If he left now, he could reach the border zone in 4 days. His supervisors would notice his absence, but he could fabricate a cover story, deep reconnaissance, tracking a suspected human intelligence vessel. It wouldn't hold up to scrutiny, but it might buy him enough time. His claws hesitated over the commit key. This was a violation of protocol, possibly a career-ending one. Kyrus would interpret any unauthorized contact with humanity as treason. Thalen thought of that whispered voice, visual confirmation of veil movement. He pressed the key. His scout ship, a sleek Roían interceptor designed for stealth operations, slipped away from the listening post with minimal thrust. The void swallowed him quickly, and within hours he'd engaged the jump drive. The stars stretched into lines, and Thalen was alone with his thoughts and the creeping certainty that he was about to discover something the galaxy wasn't ready to know. 4 days in the dark did nothing to ease Thalen's nerves. He'd spent the transit time combing through every scrap of human comm traffic his ship's limited database contained, searching for patterns, for context. What he found only deepened the unease coiling in his gut. Over the past 15 months, human military chatter had shifted. Patrol routes had been reoriented away from Roían borders and toward the galactic edge. Construction projects had pivoted from offensive carrier groups to defensive grid stations. And there were gaps, long stretches of silence from frontier colonies, followed by terse acknowledgments of redeployment or evacuation protocols. The humans were retreating, not from the Royans, from something else. When Thalen's ship finally emerged at the coordinates Captain Marin Cole had transmitted in response to his inquiry, he found himself staring at a structure that defied his expectations. The monitoring station threshold wasn't a military installation in the traditional sense. It was a fortress, yes, but one designed for observation rather than assault. Massive sensor arrays bristled from its hull, all pointed outward toward the deep black. Gun emplacements lined its superstructure, but they were positioned defensively, covering approach vectors from the void rather than from known space. Roían vessel, this is threshold control. The voice was human, female, and carried none of the hostility Thalen had anticipated. You are cleared for docking Bay 7. Captain Cole is expecting you. Thalen guided his ship through the bay doors, noting the lack of escort fighters or weapon locks. The humans weren't treating him as a threat. That somehow was more unsettling than open hostility would have been. The docking bay was sparse, functional. A handful of human technicians glanced up as Thalen disembarked, but none reached for weapons. One of them, a young woman with grease-stained hands, simply nodded toward an interior hatch. Captains on the observation deck. Third level, follow the blue line. Thalen followed the indicated path through corridors that hummed with the quiet efficiency of a well-maintained station. The walls were lined with tactical displays, each one showing portions of space far beyond the frontier. Red markers dotted the maps, dozens of them, spreading like a slow infection. The observation deck was a curved chamber dominated by a transparent viewport that stretched across half the bulkhead. Beyond it, the galaxy sprawled in cold indifference. And standing before that viewport, silhouetted against the stars, was Captain Marin Cole. She was shorter than Thalen had expected, her hair pulled back in a severe bun, her uniform crisp but worn at the edges. When she turned to face him, her eyes were shadowed with exhaustion that went deeper than missed sleep. Coordinator Thalen. She didn't extend a hand, simply inclined her head. Thank you for coming. I wasn't sure you would. I wasn't sure I should, Thalen admitted. But I heard something, a transmission. It mentioned the veil. Cole's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes. Recognition and resignation. Then you've heard more than most of your people have. Come, I'll show you what we've been watching. She led him to a central console and brought up a star map. At first, it looked like standard territorial charts, human space in blue, Roían in gold, neutral zones in gray. But then Cole overlaid another dataset, and Thalen's breath caught. Red zones, dozens of them scattered across the galactic edge, each one marked with a timestamp and a single word, silent. 15 years ago, Cole began, her voice quiet but steady, one of our deep space research stations went dark. No distress call, no debris field, just silence. We sent an investigation team. They found the station intact but empty, every system functional, every door sealed from the inside, and every single person gone. She zoomed in on one of the red markers. 2 years later, it happened again, then again. Always the same pattern, facilities left intact, populations vanished. We started calling it the veil because that's what it felt like. Something passing over a place, leaving nothing behind. Thalen stared at the map, counting the markers. 43. How many people? Millions. Cole's voice was flat. We stopped announcing the disappearances after the first dozen colonies. Panic would have torn us apart. Instead, we started evacuating frontier zones under the guise of strategic redeployment. We fortified, we watched, and we waited for someone else to notice. But no one did, Thalen said slowly. No one wanted to. Cole met his gaze. because noticing would mean admitting that there's something out there we don't understand, something that doesn't follow the rules we've built our civilizations on. Your people, the Zorii, the Telari, you're all so focused on each other, on your little territorial squabbles, that you've missed the thing that's been eating the edges of the galaxy for over a decade. Thalen felt his claws curl involuntarily. You should have told the Galactic Council. We tried. Cole's laugh was bitter. 3 times we brought evidence to the Council. 3 times we were dismissed as fear-mongering or accused of fabricating threats to justify militarization. Your overseer Kairos was particularly vocal in calling us liars. That sounded like Kairos. The overseer had built his career on projecting strength, on refusing to acknowledge threats he couldn't personally dominate. The idea that something existed beyond Roían comprehension would be, to him, intolerable. "Show me," Thalen said. "Show me proof." Cole studied him for a long moment, then nodded. She pulled up a new file, and Thalen found himself watching grainy footage from a probe, one of dozens humanity had sent into the silent zones. The footage showed a colony station, its lights still burning, its hull intact. The probe's sensor suite detected no life signs, no power fluctuations, nothing to suggest catastrophic failure. But as the probe moved closer, the camera captured something that made Thalen's spine stiffen. The station's outer airlock was open, not breached, open, as if someone had walked out into vacuum willingly. The probe entered, moving through corridors filled with the detritus of abandoned lives, meals half-eaten, workstations still active, personal belongings scattered as if their owners had simply stepped away. But there were no bodies, no blood, no signs of struggle. Just absence. "We've documented 43 sites like this," Cole said quietly. "Everyone the same, and in the last 6 months the rate of disappearances has accelerated. Whatever the veil is, it's moving faster now, bolder." Thalen's mind raced, trying to reconcile this with everything he knew about galactic threats. Pirates left wreckage, plagues left corpses, even weapons of mass destruction left evidence of their use. But this was something else entirely. "What do you think it is?" he asked. Cole turned back to the viewport, her reflection ghostly against the stars. "I don't know, but I know it's intelligent, I know it's patient, and I know it's coming." Thalen stood beside her, staring out at the dark. Somewhere beyond that glass, beyond the light of known stars, something was hunting, and humanity had been the only ones watching. "I need to take this back to my people," Thalen said. "They need to see what you've shown me." "Will they believe you?" Cole's voice carried no hope, only weary pragmatism. "They'll have to." Thalen felt the weight of that certainty settle over him. "Because if they don't, we're all going to end up like those colonies, silent and forgotten." Cole nodded slowly. "Then you'd better move fast, Coordinator, because the veil doesn't wait for anyone to be ready." Thalen's return to Roían space felt like falling into a trap of his own making. Every jump, every hour that slipped past, the weight of what he carried grew heavier. He'd copied every file Cole had given him, every scrap of evidence humanity had compiled over 15 years of silent watching. It sat in his ship's encrypted core, a singularity of terrible knowledge that would either save his people or destroy his career. Probably both. When he finally docked at the primary Roían intelligence hub, a sprawling orbital complex that bristled with weapons and paranoia, he barely had time to disembark before security detained him. They were polite but firm, escorting him through sterile corridors to a briefing room where Overseer Kairos waited, his expression carved from stone. "Coordinator Thalen," Kairos's voice could have frozen atmospheres. "You were absent from your post for 9 days. Your navigational logs show unauthorized travel into human space, and you made contact with a human military officer without clearance or backup." He leaned forward, claws clicking against the table. "Explain yourself, now." Thalen met his gaze and refused to flinch. I intercepted a human transmission that indicated a significant threat beyond our current intelligence parameters. I investigated. What I found. Overseer, we need to convene an emergency session of the War Council. Kyrus's spines flattened, a Roían expression of disdain. You expect me to mobilize the council because you chased a human ghost story. It's not a story. Thalen activated his data slate, projecting Cole's star map into the space between them. The red markers glowed like wounds. 43 colonies, millions of people, gone. The humans have been tracking this for 15 years. They've been militarizing not to attack us, but to defend against something we haven't even acknowledged exists. Kyrus studied the map, his expression unreadable. Human propaganda. They fabricated this to justify their military buildup, to make us look foolish for preparing defenses against them. Then explain this. Thalen pulled up the probe footage, the empty colony station with its open airlock, its abandoned corridors. He let it play in silence, watching Kyrus's face as the implications sank in. For a long moment the overseer said nothing. Then, equipment malfunction, mass evacuation due to environmental failure. There are a dozen mundane explanations. 43 times, Thalen interrupted. Across sectors spanning thousands of light years, with no distress signals, no debris, no survivors. He leaned forward. Overseer, I know what this looks like. I know it challenges everything we believe about our place in the galaxy, but denying it won't make it disappear. Kyrus's claws drummed against the table, a nervous tick Thalen had never seen from him before. The overseer was afraid. He just didn't want to admit it. Even if this threat exists, Kyrus said slowly, it's confined to the frontier. Our core systems are secure. We have no reason to panic over human paranoia. They're not paranoid, they're preparing. Thalen pulled up another file, human fleet deployments, construction manifests, evacuation schedules. They've accepted that the outer sectors are lost. They're building a defensive line, trying to buy time, and they're doing it alone because no one will listen to them. Then they're fools. Kyrus stood abruptly. If this veil is real, the appropriate response is to retreat to fortified core worlds and let the frontier burn. We don't have the resources to defend empty space. Those are our people out there, Thalen said quietly. Roían colonies, outposts, research stations. If we abandon them, then we survive. Kyrus's voice was cold. That is the only metric that matters, coordinator. Survival of the Dominion, not sentiment, not heroics. Thalen felt something harden in his chest. He'd known Kyrus was pragmatic, even ruthless, but he hadn't realized how far that ruthlessness extended. So we do nothing. We continue monitoring. If the threat materializes in a way that endangers core territories, we respond proportionally. Kyrus moved toward the door, then paused. You're reassigned, effective immediately. Frontier Listening Post, Sector 915. You'll have plenty of time to watch for your veil there. The sector designation hit Thalen like a physical blow. 915 was 2 jumps from the nearest silent zone. Kyrus wasn't just reassigning him. He was putting him on the front line of a threat the Overseer refused to acknowledge. Understood, Thalen said, keeping his voice level. Kyrus left without another word. Thalen stood alone in the briefing room, staring at the star map still glowing in the air. 43 red markers, soon to be 44, 45, more. He thought of Cole, standing at the viewport of Threshold, watching the dark. She'd known this would happen, known that even evidence wouldn't be enough to overcome institutional inertia and fear. Make them believe you, she'd said. He hadn't managed that, not yet. Sector 915 was exactly as grim as Thalen had anticipated. The listening post was a skeletal structure, barely large enough for 3 personnel, clinging to the edge of an unremarkable star system like a parasite. The previous crew had been rotated out 2 weeks prior, standard procedure, they'd told him. But Thalen noticed the transfer had been expedited, and none of them had been reassigned to similar posts. They'd all been pulled back to core stations. Someone in command, it seemed, had believed him just enough to start quietly repositioning personnel. That should have been comforting. Instead, it made his skin crawl. The first week passed in tense monotony. Thalen monitored calm traffic, logged ship movements, filed reports that he knew Kyrus would ignore. At night, though night was a meaningless concept in the timeless void, he reviewed Cole's data, cross-referencing it with Roían intelligence archives. The pattern was undeniable once you knew to look for it. Colonies went silent in clusters, spreading outward from a rough central point somewhere in the galactic dark. Not random, methodical. Whatever the veil was, it was working its way inward, toward known space, toward civilization. On the 8th day, the comms crackled to life. Listening post 915, this is Outpost Kara. We're experiencing some kind of sensor malfunction. Request technical support. Thalen's claws moved over the console before he consciously registered the message. Kara, this is 915. What kind of malfunction? A pause filled with static and something else. Breathing fast and shallow. Everything's reading operational, but we're picking up movement on the hull. External cameras show nothing, but the motion sensors are going insane. Ice crystallized in Thalen's veins. Kara, seal all exterior access points. Initiate lockdown protocols now. Already done. But the voice cut off, replaced by a sharp metallic screech that made Thalen's audio filters spike into the red. Kara, report. More static, then faintly. They're inside. How are they inside? We sealed everything. The transmission ended. Thalen stared at the comm panel, his heart's hammering. Kara was a Roían research outpost, population 47, established 3 years ago to study stellar phenomena in the sector. It was less than 2 light towers from his position. He pulled up the outpost's last known data feed. Life support nominal, structural integrity nominal, power systems nominal. Everything was functioning perfectly. Except no one was answering. Thalen's claws moved without conscious thought, initiating an emergency transmission to Fleet Command. This is Coordinator Thalen, listening post 915. Outpost Kara has gone silent mid-transmission. Request immediate investigation and possible evacuation of sector personnel. The response came within minutes, faster than Thalen had expected. Overseer Kyrus's voice, tight with something that might have been fear. Thalen, what exactly did you hear? Thalen played back the recording. Kyrus listened in silence, and when it ended, the silence stretched even longer. Maintain position, Kyrus finally said. A patrol squadron is being diverted to Kara. You are not under any circumstances to approach that outpost. Is that clear? Understood, Thalen paused. Overseer, this is what I warned you about, the veil. I don't care what the humans call it. Kyrus's voice was strained. Just stay where you are. We're evacuating the sector within 12 hours. The transmission cut. Thalen sat in the silence, listening to his own breathing echoing in the cramped post. Around him, the void pressed close, vast and patient. And somewhere in that darkness, something was moving closer. The patrol squadron reached Outpost Kara 4 hours later. Thalen monitored their transmissions from his listening post, his claws tight against the console as the military vessels closed on the silent station. Kara, this is Patrol Leader Ven. Respond on all frequencies. Nothing. Kara, this is an official Dominion inquiry. Acknowledge immediately or we will board. The silence stretched. Then from the patrol leader, sensors show the station is intact, life support active, no breaches, no debris, but no life signs either. Boarding authorized, came the response from Fleet Command. Exercise extreme caution. Thalen wanted to scream at them to turn back, to run, but he kept his channel muted and simply watched the data feed scroll past. The boarding team consisted of 8 soldiers, full combat armor, equipped for hostile engagement. They breached the airlock without incident, moving through Kara's corridors in tight formation. The helmet cam feeds showed exactly what Thalen had feared: empty corridors, active workstations, personal effects scattered but not disturbed, meals half-eaten in the commissary, and in the research labs experiments still running, their equipment humming softly to itself. "No bodies," one of the soldiers muttered. "Where the hell is everyone?" They searched for 30 minutes, finding nothing. No signs of struggle, no blood, no indication of how 47 Royans had simply vanished from a sealed station. Then, from the soldier at the rear of the formation, contact. The helmet cam swung toward a corridor junction. For a moment the feed showed only shadow. Then something moved, a shape that Thalen's mind struggled to process. It wasn't quite solid, wasn't quite there, like watching someone through distorted glass. "Open fire." The corridor erupted in weapon discharge, plasma bolts tearing through the air. But the shape didn't fall. It didn't retreat. It simply absorbed the fire, the energy dissipating across its surface like water on stone. Then it moved forward, impossibly fast. The helmet cam feeds went dark one by one, each cut accompanied by a brief burst of static and a sound that Thalen's translator couldn't parse. Something between a scream and something else, something without a name. 8 feeds, 8 soldiers, gone in less than 30 seconds. Patrol Leader Ven, Fleet Command's voice was tight. "Report status of boarding team." "Silence." Ven, respond immediately. The patrol ships were pulling back now, their engines flaring as they broke away from Kara. But one of them, the rear guard, wasn't moving fast enough. Thalen watched through the squadron's external cameras as something emerged from the station. Not through the airlock. Through the hull, the metal peeling away like skin as a shape forced its way into the void. It moved without engines, without visible propulsion, drifting toward the fleeing ship with terrible patience. When it made contact, the ship systems went haywire. Power fluctuations, hull breaches appearing from within, and then, just like Kara, the vessel went silent. The remaining patrol ships jumped without waiting for authorization, vanishing into FTL with the kind of panic Thalen had never seen from Roían military personnel. He sat in his listening post, staring at the empty screens, his body numb with a terror he'd never experienced before. This wasn't war. War had rules, had logic, had an enemy you could understand and fight. This was extermination. His console pinged, a priority transmission from Fleet Command. Overseer Kyrus's face appeared and Thalen almost didn't recognize him. The Overseer's spines were fully flattened, his skin pale, his eyes haunted. "All personnel in sectors 914 through 928 are ordered to evacuate immediately. This is not a drill. Abandon your posts and make for core territories with all possible speed." Thalen didn't need to be told twice. He was already initiating launch protocols, his ship's drives spooling up with agonizing slowness. "Overseer, what about Kara? What about the patrol squadron?" Kyrus's expression was hollow. "Kara is lost. The squadron," he trailed off, then seemed to force himself to continue. "The squadron is being listed as missing in action. We're establishing a new defensive perimeter at Sector 930. All forces are being pulled back." "That's 8 sectors," Thalen said, his voice numb. "You're abandoning 8 sectors of space." "I'm saving the Dominion," Kyrus snapped, but there was no conviction behind the words, only exhaustion. "You were right, Coordinator, about all of it, and now," he shook his head, "now we do what the humans have been doing, we retreat, we fortify, and we hope it's enough." The transmission ended. Thalen's ship detached from the listening post, engines burning hard as he fled toward the core. Behind him, Sector 915 fell into darkness, one more addition to the growing silence. And somewhere in that silence, the Veil continued its patient work. 3 days later, Thalen stood before the assembled War Council in the Dominion's primary command center. The chamber was packed, not just with Royan leadership, but with representatives from a dozen species. Word of Kara's fall had spread, and suddenly, no one was dismissing human paranoia anymore. The footage played on the central display, the empty station, the soldiers vanishing one by one, the patrol ship consumed. When it ended, the silence in the chamber was absolute. Grand Warlord Torval, the eldest and most decorated of the Royan military, spoke first. His voice was measured, but Thalen could hear the tension beneath. How many outposts have gone silent in the past 72 hours? 14, Kairos reported. Across 3 species territories, Royan, Zorii, and Telari, all following the same pattern. A Telari diplomat, her scales shimmering with agitation, leaned forward. Why were we not informed of this threat earlier? Our people are dying. Because until 3 days ago, most of us didn't believe it existed, Torval cut her off. The humans tried to warn us. We ignored them. That mistake ends now. He activated a new display, showing a proposed defensive line, a network of fortified stations and fleet positions forming a barrier between known space and the expanding silent zones. This is the Bulwark Protocol. Every species contributes ships, resources, personnel. We hold this line or we fall separately. And the colonies beyond the line? Someone asked. Torval's expression was carved from stone. We evacuate what we can, the rest. He didn't finish. He didn't need to. Thalen felt the weight of it settle over the chamber. Hundreds of colonies, billions of people, lost because they'd waited too long to act. There's one more thing, Thalen said, drawing the council's attention. Captain Marin Cole, the human officer who provided the initial intelligence, has proposed a joint reconnaissance mission into the silent zones. She believes we need to understand what we're fighting if we're going to have any chance of survival. Reconnaissance. The Telari diplomat's voice was sharp. You saw what happened to your patrol squadron. You want to send more people into that. I want to learn, Thalen said quietly. Because right now, we know nothing. We don't know what the veil is, where it came from, what it wants. And fighting an enemy you don't understand is just slow suicide. Torval studied him for a long moment. Then, approved, you'll coordinate with Captain Cole, take a small, fast ship. Get in, gather data, get out. If you encounter direct contact. He paused. Don't. Thalen inclined his head. Understood. As the council dissolved into tactical planning sessions, Kairos pulled Thalen aside. The Overseer's earlier hostility was gone, replaced by something Thalen had never expected to see in him. Regret. I should have listened to you, Kairos said quietly. Kara's personnel. Those 47 people died because I was too proud to admit I was wrong. Thalen didn't know what to say. Kairos had always been a figure of absolute authority, unshakable in his convictions. Seeing him like this, diminished, haunted, was somehow worse than any anger would have been. We all made mistakes, Thalen finally said. Now we fix them if we can. Kairos nodded slowly. Bring back something we can use, coordinator, because that defensive line, it's not going to hold forever. The joint reconnaissance vessel was a testament to desperate cooperation, a Roían stealth frame fitted with human sensor arrays and a Zorii navigation core. Fast, quiet, and expendable, exactly what the mission required. Captain Marin Cole met Thalen in the docking bay, her face drawn but determined. She looked like she hadn't slept in days, probably because she hadn't. Coordinator, she greeted him, ready to see the dark up close. As ready as I'll ever be, Thalen replied. Your crew. Just us, Cole said. Smaller signature, faster extraction if things go wrong, plus, she smiled without humor, fewer people to lose if things go very wrong. They boarded the ship, running through pre-flight checks in tense silence. The rest of the joint fleet had already begun positioning along the bulwark line, hundreds of vessels from a dozen species, united by fear of a common enemy. It should have felt like a triumph of galactic cooperation. Instead, it felt like a funeral. The reconnaissance vessel slipped away from the fleet, its stealth systems masking their signature as they crossed the defensive perimeter and headed toward the silent zones. Cole piloted while Thalen monitored sensors, watching the empty space ahead for any sign of activity. "You know," Cole said after an hour of silence, "when we first detected the veil, some of our analysts thought it might be a natural phenomenon, some kind of exotic matter that absorbed biological signatures." "You don't believe that anymore," Thalen said. "No." Cole's hands were steady on the controls, but her voice was tight. "Natural phenomena don't learn, they don't adapt. Whatever this is, it's intelligent, and it's patient." They emerged into what had been a thriving Zorii colony sector 2 months prior. Now it was a graveyard. Stations drifted intact but lifeless, their lights still burning, their systems still active. Ships hung motionless in space, their crews simply gone. Thalen brought up detailed scans of the nearest station. Life support nominal, no hull breaches, no signs of weapons discharge. He looked up at Cole. "It's exactly like the human colonies." "Let's take a closer look." Cole maneuvered them toward the station, bringing the reconnaissance vessel to within visual range. Through the viewport, Thalen could see the colony's observation deck, its interior lights casting long shadows across empty corridors. Then something moved. "Did you see that?" Thalen's voice was barely a whisper. Cole was already adjusting sensors, narrowing the focus. "Where?" "Port side, third level. Something passed across the viewport." They watched in silence for a long minute. Nothing. Then again, a flicker of movement too fast to track, too indistinct to identify. "Whatever it is," Cole said slowly, "it's still there, still active." She began powering up the jump drive. "We need to." The ship lurched violently. Alarms shrieked as something impacted their hull, not a physical collision, but a surge of energy that made the vessel's system scream in protest. "Contact!" Thalen shouted, his claws flying across the console. Unknown signature, multiple vectors closing fast. Cole didn't waste time with questions. She pushed the engines to maximum burn, yanking the ship away from the station. But whatever had touched them wasn't letting go. Thalen watched in horror as their hull integrity readings fluctuated, sections of the ship showing impossible stress points from within. "It's inside the systems," he said, his voice tight. "Physically inside, how is that possible?" "Doesn't matter." Cole's jaw was set. "Jump drive status." 30 seconds to full charge." Something scraped against the hull, a sound that shouldn't have been audible in vacuum, but somehow was. Thalen pulled up external cameras and immediately wished he hadn't. Shapes, dozens of them clinging to the vessel's surface, moving with horrible fluidity. They looked almost Zorii in form, bipedal, four-armed, but wrong, distorted, as if someone had tried to remake living tissue from memory and gotten the details catastrophically wrong. "Those are Zorii colonists," Thalen whispered, "or they were." Cole didn't look. She was focused entirely on the controls, fighting to keep the ship stable as more impacts rattled the frame. 20 seconds. The shapes began pulling at the hull plating, peeling it back with impossible strength. Thalen could see the metal buckling, tearing, as they forced their way toward the interior. One of them turned toward the camera, and Thalen's mind rejected what he saw, a face that had once been someone, twisted into something that defied biological logic. 10 seconds. The hull breached. Alarms screamed as atmosphere began venting. Thalen sealed his suit's helmet with shaking hands, watching as the first of the shapes began forcing its way through the breach. 5 seconds. The thing pulled itself fully into the corridor, its movements jerky and wrong. It turned toward the camera, and Thalen heard something that made his blood freeze, a sound like words, like language, but spoken by a throat that no longer worked properly. "Jump." The FTL drive engaged, reality bending around them as the ship tore free from normal space. The shapes vanished, left behind in the void they'd been trying to consume. Cole sagged in her seat, breathing hard. Status. Thalen ran diagnostics with trembling hands. Hull breach sealed by emergency protocols. Systems compromised but functional. Life support. Holding. He looked up at her, his expression haunted. Cole, those things, they were. I know, her voice was hollow. The veil doesn't just consume people, it uses them. They sat in silence as the ship hurtled through FTL, putting light years between themselves and the horror they'd witnessed. But Thalen knew distance meant nothing. What they'd seen was already spreading, already claiming new territory, new victims. We need to report this, he finally said. Cole nodded slowly. But first, she brought up the sensor logs, the footage of the transformed colonists. We need to make sure everyone understands what we're really fighting, because those things used to be people. They used to have lives, families, hopes. She met Thalen's gaze, and he saw in her eyes the same exhaustion, the same grief he felt. And now they're weapons, just like everyone else the veil takes. The debriefing chamber was silent as the footage played. Thalen and Cole stood side by side, watching the council's reactions as the transformed Zorii colonists appeared on screen. Some of the representatives turned away. Others watched with grim determination, but all of them understood what they were seeing. This wasn't just an enemy, it was a fate. When the footage ended, Grand Warlord Torval was the first to speak. You're certain these were Zorii citizens from the Carol colony? Genetic markers confirm it, Cole said. They're still recognizable as individuals, at least to our sensors, but whatever did this to them, it rewrote them, body and mind. A Zorii military commander, her scales dark with distress, leaned forward. Can they be saved, restored? Thalen wanted to lie, wanted to offer hope, but he'd seen too much. No, the transformation is absolute there. They're gone. The chamber erupted in overlapping voices, demands for action, calls for evacuation, questions no one could answer. Torval silenced them with a gesture, his expression carved from granite. Then we know what we're facing, he said. An enemy that doesn't just kill but claims, turns our own people against us, makes every loss a weapon in their arsenal. He activated the tactical display, showing the defensive line. The bulwark holds. We evacuate every colony within 2 sectors of the line. Everything beyond that, he paused, the weight of the decision visible in his stance. Everything beyond that is lost. That's 12 billion people, the Telari diplomat said, her voice barely controlled. You're condemning 12 billion people to. I'm saving 30 trillion, Torval cut her off. If we try to hold too much ground, we'll lose everything. The bulwark is our last chance. He turned to Thalen and Cole. Your reconnaissance confirmed what we needed to know. Now we adapt. Overseer Kyra stepped forward, his earlier uncertainty replaced by grim purpose. I'm reassigning military assets to evacuation duty. Every ship we can spare goes to pulling people out of the frontier zones. We save who we can. And the defensive line, someone asked. Joint Command, Torval said. Human tactical doctrine, Roían strategic coordination, Zorii engineering support. This isn't just our war anymore. It belongs to all of us. As the council dissolved into logistics planning, Cole pulled Thalen aside. Her expression was carefully neutral, but he could see the tension in her shoulders. There's something else, she said quietly. Something the sensors picked up during our escape. She pulled up a data file on her personal tablet, showing energy signatures the reconnaissance vessel had recorded in the seconds before they jumped. The Veil entities, they were communicating, not randomly, not just reacting, they were coordinating. Thalen studied the patterns, his analytical mind automatically searching for structure. And there, buried in the noise, he found it. A signal, repeating, complex. They have command structure, he breathed, organization. Which means they can be understood, Cole said, maybe even communicated with. Thalen looked up sharply. You can't be suggesting. I'm not suggesting anything except that we need every advantage we can get. She closed the file. Right now, we're fighting blind. If there's any chance of learning their intentions, their weaknesses. She trailed off, but the implication hung between them. Thalen wanted to refuse, wanted to tell her it was madness to even consider trying to communicate with something that had consumed millions. But she was right. They needed advantages, needed hope, even if that hope was razor-thin. We'd need authorization, he said slowly, and a team willing to take the risk. Cole's smile was sad. Then it's lucky we already have both. 2 weeks later, Thalen stood on the bridge of the human monitoring station threshold, watching the defensive line take shape through the viewport. Hundreds of ships hung in formation, a barrier of metal and determination against the encroaching dark. It was impressive, and it wasn't going to be enough. Behind him, Cole was coordinating with the Joint Command Staff, her voice calm despite the chaos of evacuation reports flooding the communications network. They'd pulled 3 billion people back from the frontier zones. 9 billion more were still out there, in colonies too remote or too stubborn to abandon. Those 9 billion were living on borrowed time. Coordinator Thalen, a young human officer, approached, holding a data slate. We've finished analyzing the communication patterns you recovered. You should see this. Thalen took the slate, scanning the decoded analysis. What he found made his blood chill. The signals weren't random. They were structured, purposeful, and underneath the obvious coordination patterns there was something else, a substrate frequency that matched nothing in any known database. Except it did remind him of something, organic neural activity. They're thinking, he said aloud, not as individuals, as a collective, a hive mind. The officer nodded grimly. That's our assessment too, and sir, the pattern is accelerating. Whatever they're planning, they're doing it faster now. Thalen handed back the slate and moved to the tactical display. The red zones had expanded again overnight, swallowing 2 more Telari colonies. The veil was moving with increasing speed, no longer bothering with subtlety. Cole joined him, her face drawn. Evacuation of Sector 939 is complete. 940 is, she trailed off, shaking her head. They're refusing to leave, say they'd rather die on their own worlds than abandon them. Then they'll get their wish, Thalen said quietly. An alarm cut through the bridge chatter. One of the sensor technicians looked up, his face pale. Contact, multiple signatures emerging from the dark. Distance, 3 light towers heading, he swallowed hard, heading directly for the bulwark line. Thalen felt the floor drop out from under him. How many? Estimate, thousands, maybe tens of thousands, all matching the profile of transformed ships from the silent zones. The bridge went deathly quiet. Then Cole's voice, steady and cold. Sound general quarters, all ships to combat alert. This is not a drill. The fleet sprang to life, weapons systems powering up, shields engaging, fighters launching in defensive formations. Thalen watched the approaching mass on the sensors, his mind struggling to process the scale. They'd known this was coming, but knowing and seeing were very different things. Communication from Grand Warlord Torval, a technician reported. He's ordering all non-combat personnel to fall back to secondary positions. That includes us, Cole said, looking at Thalen. We're evacuating threshold. No, Thalen surprised himself with the firmness in his voice. We stay. If there's any chance of understanding what's happening, we need to observe. Cole studied him for a long moment, then nodded. Then we stay together, whatever comes. The first wave hit the defensive line 30 minutes later. Thalen watched through the tactical display as transformed ships, vessels that had once belonged to a dozen different species, slammed into the bulwark forces with suicidal ferocity. They didn't maneuver, didn't retreat, just drove forward with single-minded purpose. And when they died, they took defenders with them. The battle was chaos. Energy weapons tore through the dark, kinetic rounds creating storms of debris, ships exploding in silent fury. But for every attacker destroyed, two more pressed forward. The defensive line was holding, but barely. Then something changed. New signature, a sensor tech reported, her voice shaking. Large mass, emerging from the center of the attack formation. The display zoomed in, and Thalen felt his heart seize. The thing emerging from the veil was enormous, easily the size of a capital ship, but wrong. Its hull was a patchwork of different vessels, fused together in grotesque amalgamation. And it was covered in those shapes, those transformed beings, moving across its surface like insects. That's not a ship, Cole breathed. That's a carrier. They're learning, adapting our tactics. The construct opened fire, and Thalen watched in horror as its weapons, cobbled together from dozens of different technologies, tore through the defensive line with terrifying efficiency. Ships that should have withstood the assault crumbled under the barrage. Shields that should have held failed against weapons that adapted in real time. All ships focus fire on the construct, Torval's voice cut through the chaos. Bring it down before. The transmission cut to static. Thalen pulled up Torval's ship on sensors. The dreadnought was listing, its hull breached in a dozen places. Life signs were dropping, rapidly. Torval's down, Cole said, her voice tight. Command is fragmenting. Around them, the defensive line was breaking, not in organized retreat but in panic. Ships jumped away without coordination, leaving gaps that the veil entities poured through. Within minutes, the bulwark, the last organized defense between the frontier and core space, was collapsing. Get us out of here, Thalen said quietly. There's nothing more we can do. Cole nodded, already initiating Threshold's jump sequence. As the station prepared to evacuate, Thalen took one last look at the battle. The construct was still advancing, still firing, still consuming. And behind it, more were emerging from the dark. The galaxy had lost its first line of defense, and the Veil had proven it could defeat anything they threw at it. The war had truly begun, and they were already losing. Threshold materialized in the comparative safety of Sector 872, far behind the remains of the defensive line. Around them, other survivors trickled in, damaged ships, civilian transports, military vessels running on emergency power. What had been an organized defense was now a scattered retreat. Cole sat heavily in her command chair, staring at the casualty reports scrolling across her screen. We lost 40% of the fleet in under 3 hours. Torval's dreadnought is confirmed destroyed. Hundreds of ships, thousands of personnel. She closed her eyes. Gone. Thalen stood at the sensor station, monitoring the dark for signs of pursuit. So far, nothing. The Veil had stopped at the remains of the bulwark line, consolidating its position rather than pressing the attack. That should have been comforting. It wasn't. They're learning from us, he said. That construct, it wasn't just improvised. It was designed. They studied our defensive positions and built something specifically to break them. Which means every battle teaches them more, Cole finished. Every tactic we use, every weapon we deploy just makes them stronger. The bridge door hissed open. Overseer Kairos entered, his armor scorched, his scales blackened with burns. He'd been commanding one of the flank positions when the line collapsed. The fact that he'd survived was remarkable. The look in his eyes suggested he wished he hadn't. Status, he asked, his voice hoarse. Stabilizing, Cole reported. We've established a temporary command network. 23% of the fleet is combat effective. Another 30% can be repaired. The rest. She didn't finish. Kairos nodded slowly, then turned to the tactical display. The map showed the new reality, a ragged line of survivors holding positions across a dozen sectors, trying to form some semblance of defense while the veil consolidated behind them. "We're pulling back to Sector 850, Kyrus said. "Joint Command is establishing a secondary defensive line there, deeper into core space, better fortified positions. We'll make our stand there." "It won't work," Thalen said quietly. Kyrus's spines flattened. "Coordinator." "It won't work," Thalen repeated louder now. "You saw what they did to the bulwark. We had more ships, better positions, strategic depth, and they broke us in 3 hours. A second line will just take them 4. "Then what do you suggest?" Kyrus snapped. "That we surrender, accept extinction." Thalen met his gaze. "I suggest we stop fighting a war we can't win and start fighting one we might." The bridge went silent. Cole stood slowly. "What are you proposing?" Thalen activated his data slate, pulling up the communication patterns they'd analyzed. "The veil isn't mindless. It's coordinated, intelligent, which means it can be understood, possibly even negotiated with." "You want to talk to them," Kyrus said flatly, "to the things that have consumed billions of people." "I want to understand what they want," Thalen corrected. "Because right now we're assuming they're just an extinction force, mindlessly consuming. But what if there's more to it? What if they have goals, motivations, limits?" Cole was studying the communication patterns, her expression thoughtful. "You think they might stop if we give them something they want?" "I think we need to know if that's even possible," Thalen said. "Because if it's not, if they truly are just a force of nature bent on consuming everything, then we should stop pretending we're fighting a war and start preparing to preserve what we can before the end." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. No one wanted to acknowledge what Thalen was saying, that maybe, just maybe, survival meant accepting defeat on every level except the most fundamental one. Kyrus turned away, his claws clenched. "I need to consult with command, but coordinator," he paused. "If there's any chance of understanding these things, take it, because you're right. We can't win the way we've been fighting." He left and Thalen sagged against the console. Cole moved beside him, her expression unreadable. "You know what you're proposing," she said quietly. "Going into the dark, making contact, it's suicide." "Probably," Thalen agreed. "But sitting here waiting for them to come to us, that's definitely suicide. At least this way, we might learn something useful before we die." Cole was quiet for a long moment. Then, "I'm coming with you." "No." "Yes." Her tone left no room for argument. "If this is our last chance to understand what we're fighting, we do it together. You need a pilot. I need—" She trailed off, her eyes distant. "I need to know if any of this mattered, if all the people we lost, all the sacrifices, if there was ever any chance it could have ended differently." Thalen wanted to argue, wanted to protect her from the horror he knew they'd face. But he saw in her eyes the same exhaustion he felt, the same desperate need for answers, even if those answers led nowhere. "All right," he said finally, "we go together." They stood side by side, staring out at the void where the veil waited, patient and inevitable. Behind them, the remnants of galactic civilization scrambled to build new defenses, to save what they could. Ahead lay only darkness, and in that darkness, perhaps, the truth they'd been too afraid to seek. The reconnaissance ship was the same vessel they'd used before, hastily repaired and refitted with new sensor arrays designed to detect and analyze the Veil's communication patterns. It wasn't much. But then, Thalen and Cole weren't expecting to come back. They'd filed their mission plan with Joint Command expecting resistance. Instead, they'd been given immediate authorization and a directive that chilled Thalen to his core. Establish contact by any means necessary. Duration, indefinite. Extraction, not guaranteed. Command was throwing them into the dark, and hopping something useful came back. They just weren't counting on that something being Thalen and Cole themselves. The launch bay was nearly empty as they prepped the ship. Most of the fleet was engaged in evacuation operations or repositioning to the secondary defensive line. Only a handful of personnel remained on threshold, and even they were preparing to abandon the station. Kairos met them at the airlock. The overseer's appearance had deteriorated over the past week, his scales dull, his movements heavy with exhaustion, but his eyes were clear when he looked at Thalen. "I was wrong," Kairos said without preamble. "About you, about the humans, about all of it. If I'd listened when you first brought this to me," he shook his head, "maybe things would be different." "Maybe," Thalen said quietly, "or maybe we'd just be dead sooner. Some things are inevitable, Overseer." Kairos extended his hand in the human gesture of farewell. Thalen took it. "Find us something we can use, Coordinator. Even if it's just knowledge of how we die, that's more than we have now." Cole secured the last of their supplies and sealed the airlock. Through the viewport, Thalen watched Threshold fall away as they disengaged, the station's lights growing smaller until they were just another point in the vast dark. "Course plotted," Cole said. "We're heading for the last known position of the Veil construct. If they have any kind of central intelligence, that's where it'll be." Thalen pulled up the sensor arrays, making final adjustments. "And if we're wrong?" "Then we'll be dead wrong," Cole said with dark humor, "but at least we'll have tried." The ship jumped, reality bending around them as they crossed into the territories the Veil had claimed. When they emerged, Thalen's sensors immediately painted a picture of horror. The sector had been home to a thriving Telari colony cluster, 7 worlds, 40 billion people. Now it was silent, but not empty. Ships drifted in orbit around dead worlds, their hulls intact but lifeless. And moving between them, Thalen could see the shapes, thousands of them, maybe millions, working with terrible purpose. "They're building something," Cole breathed. Thalen zoomed the sensors in. She was right. The transformed entities were using the derelict ships, dismantling them and reassembling the components into new structures. Some looked like vessels. Others defied classification, twisted amalgamations of technology and what might have been organic matter. "It's not just consumption," Thalen said slowly. "They're creating, adapting what they take and using it for." He trailed off, his mind struggling with the implications. "For what?" Cole asked. Thalen pulled up the communication analysis. The signals were stronger here, more complex. And underneath it all, that same substrate pattern, neural activity, but on a scale that dwarfed anything natural. "I don't think the Veil is one thing," he said. "I think it's a process, a transformation. It takes individual beings and makes them part of something larger, a collective consciousness." Cole's hands tightened on the controls. "And if they catch us?" "Then we become part of it." Thalen met her gaze. "Which is why we stay in the ship, no matter what, understood?" She nodded, but Thalen could see the fear in her eyes. The same fear he felt. Because understanding what the Veil was didn't make it less terrifying. If anything, it made it worse. They moved deeper into the sector, following the strongest communication signals. The density of transformed entities increased. Thousands became hundreds of thousands, then millions. They moved across the surfaces of dead worlds like a living carpet, reshaping everything they touched. "There," Cole pointed. "That structure, it's at the center of the signal pattern." Thalen looked. At the heart of the sector, surrounded by a halo of transformed ships and entities, hung something that had once been a Telari orbital habitat. But it had been changed, expanded, its original structure barely recognizable beneath layers of new growth. And it was alive. Thalen could see it on sensors, energy patterns that suggested biological activity on a planetary scale. "That's where they're coordinating from," he said. "That's the center of their consciousness." Cole adjusted their approach vector, bringing them in slowly. "If we're going to make contact, this is our chance." They drifted closer, and Thalen activated the communication suite they'd prepared, broadcasting on every frequency, using every protocol, mathematical and linguistic patterns designed to convey peaceful intent. For a long minute, nothing happened. Then the ship lurched as something grabbed them, not physically, but energetically, a field that locked onto their vessel and began pulling them toward the structure. "They've got us," Cole said, fighting the controls. "I can't break free." "Don't," Thalen's voice was surprisingly steady. "This is what we came for. They're responding." The ship was drawn into the structure through an opening that hadn't existed moments before. Around them, the walls pulsed with that organic metal hybrid, and Thalen could see shapes moving in the shadows, the transformed entities, watching, waiting. They came to rest in what might have been a docking bay, the ship settling onto a surface that shifted beneath them like living tissue. Through the viewport, Thalen could see more clearly now. The entities weren't just moving randomly. They were arranged in patterns, formations that suggested organization far beyond anything they'd encountered before. Then one of them approached the ship. It had been Telari once. Thalen could see the remnants of their distinctive crest, their four-armed form. But it had been changed, its body reconfigured into something that moved with unsettling fluidity. It placed one hand against the viewport and spoke. The sound came through their external microphones, distorted and strange, but unmistakably language. Telari words, spoken with a voice that shouldn't have been able to form them. "You seek understanding." Thalen's heart's hammered. Cole was frozen beside him, her face pale, but they'd come this far. He activated the external speakers. "Yes, we seek understanding. We need to know what you want, why you're doing this." The entity tilted its head, a gesture that was hauntingly familiar, almost human. When it spoke again, the words came easier, as if it was remembering how. "We are incomplete. We were alone, separate, each mind, trapped, limited." It gestured to the others around it. "Now we are together, unified, complete." "You're taking people," Thalen said carefully. "Entire civilizations, consuming them." "Transforming," the entity corrected. "Freeing they were, suffering, divided, alone we give them. Purpose, unity, peace." Cole's voice was shaking when she spoke. "You're killing them, erasing who they were." "No," the entity's tone was almost gentle. "We are saving them, making them. More the individual is, pain, confusion, fear, the collective is, understanding, harmony." It pressed closer to the viewport. "You feel it, the fear, the isolation. We can end that, make you whole." Thalen felt his blood turn to ice, because some terrible part of him understood. The exhaustion of fighting alone, of carrying the weight of decisions that meant life or death. The temptation to just let go, to become part of something larger, to share the burden with others. "No," he said, forcing strength into his voice. "That's not salvation. That's annihilation. We're individuals. That's not a flaw, it's what makes us alive." The entity was silent for a long moment. Then, "You cannot stop us. We grow, we spread, soon. All will be one, united, at peace." "Is that what this is?" Cole's voice was hard now, anger cutting through fear. "Peace. You're consuming the galaxy, erasing everything that makes us who we are and calling it peace." "Yes." The entity's response was simple, absolute. "And you will understand when you join us, when you feel the silence." The field holding their ship intensified. Thalen felt the vessel's system straining as something began to seep through the hull, not physically breaching it, but infiltrating it on some fundamental level. "We need to go," he said urgently. "Now." Cole was already firing the engines, pouring everything they had into breaking free. The ship shuddered, alarms shrieking as the structure around them tried to hold on, tried to pull them in completely. Through the viewport, Thalen saw the entity watching them, its expression almost sad. "You will return," it said. "All return, in the end. All are one." Then they were free, the ship tearing away from the structure with explosive force. Cole jumped without hesitation, and reality bent around them as they fled back toward known space. In the silence of FTL, Thalen and Cole sat without speaking, both processing what they'd witnessed, what they'd learned. Finally, Cole spoke, her voice hollow. They really believe they're helping, saving people. Which makes them more dangerous than any mindless threat, Thalen said. Because you can't negotiate with someone who thinks they're offering salvation. There's no compromise possible. Cole nodded slowly. Then we tell command, tell them what we learned, that the veil can't be reasoned with, can't be bargained with, that this is a war of survival, the most fundamental kind. Thalen thought of the entity's final words, all return, in the end, all are one. Yes, he agreed, we tell them and we make sure they understand. The ship continued its flight through the dark, carrying two witnesses who had seen the truth and survived. Behind them, the veil continued its patient work, growing, spreading, transforming. And ahead lay a galaxy that would have to make an impossible choice. Fight a war they couldn't win, or accept a peace that meant the end of everything they were. Threshold had been evacuated by the time they returned. The station drifted empty, its systems on standby, a ghost ship waiting for a crew that would never return. Cole brought their reconnaissance vessel to dock with mechanical precision, neither of them speaking as they went through the post-flight procedures. The silence between them was different now, heavier, weighted with knowledge that neither of them knew how to process. We should transmit our findings to Fleet Command, Thalen finally said, his voice rough from disuse. Cole nodded, already compiling the data. The transmission took minutes to prepare but felt like hours. Every word they wrote felt insufficient, every description inadequate to convey what they'd witnessed. How did you explain that the enemy consuming the galaxy thought it was offering mercy? When the transmission was sent, they sat in the empty station's command center, waiting for a response that came sooner than expected. Overseer Kyrus appeared on the screen, and Thalen was shocked by how much he'd aged in just the few days they'd been gone. The Roían scales were dull, his eyes sunken. Behind him, Thalen could see the chaos of a temporary command center, officers running between stations, alarms blaring, tactical displays showing defensive positions being overrun. Coordinator, Kyrus's voice was tight. Your timing is unfortunate. The secondary defensive line collapsed 4 hours ago. The veil broke through near Sector 853 and is pushing toward core territories. We're falling back to tertiary positions. Thalen's stomach dropped. How long? Estimates vary, days, maybe weeks. They're moving faster now and Kyrus shook his head. We don't have the resources to hold them, not anymore. Cole leaned forward. Overseer, our reconnaissance, we made contact with a veil entity. We understand what they are now, what they want. It's irrelevant, Kyrus cut her off, though there was no anger in his voice, only exhaustion. I've read your preliminary report. The veil thinks it's saving people by consuming them. That's almost worse than if they were just mindlessly destructive. At least then we could hate them without complication. He rubbed his eyes, a gesture so human it was jarring coming from a Roían. But it doesn't change our situation. We're losing, Captain. Every hour more sectors go dark, more ships are consumed, more people are transformed. The joint command is fracturing. Species are pulling back to defend their own homeworlds. The alliance is dying. Thalen felt the words like physical blows. They'd come this far, sacrificed so much, learned truths that should have mattered, and it had all been for nothing. What are our orders? Cole asked quietly. Kyrus was silent for a long moment. Then, there are no more orders. Command is recommending that all remaining personnel do what they can to save who they can. Evacuate civilians, fall back to core worlds, prepare for whatever comes. That's surrender, Thalen said. That's survival, Kyrus corrected. Or the hope of it, at least. We've lost this war, Coordinator. Now we're just trying to make sure something survives to remember that we tried. The transmission ended, leaving Thalen and Cole alone in the silence. Around them, Threshold hummed quietly, its systems running on automatic, still scanning the dark for threats that didn't matter anymore. He's right, Cole said finally. We've lost. The only question now is how many we can save before the end. Thalen wanted to argue, wanted to find some thread of hope to cling to, but the truth was undeniable. The veil had broken them, not through superior force alone, but through the sheer inevitability of its expansion. Every battle taught it more. Every loss made it stronger. And now, with the alliance crumbling, there was nothing left to stop it. I'm going back to human space, Cole said. Try to help with evacuation operations. Get as many people as I can to the core worlds. She looked at Thalen. What will you do? Thalen thought of his people, of the Roían dominion that had seemed so powerful, so inevitable. Now they were just another species waiting for extinction. The same, he said. Try to save who I can. Cole stood, and for a moment, they just looked at each other. Two beings from different species who had fought together, survived together, and now faced the same inevitable end together. It mattered, Cole said quietly. What we did, even if it didn't change anything, it mattered that we tried. Thalen nodded, not trusting his voice. Then Cole was gone, heading back to her ship, back to the desperate work of saving fragments from the catastrophe. Thalen remained in the command center, staring at the tactical display. The red zones continued to expand, bleeding across the map like a slow infection. He thought of the entity they'd spoken to, of its certainty that it was offering peace. Of the billions already transformed, their individual voices silenced in favor of the collective's harmony. And he thought of the billions yet to fall, the children who would never grow up, the lovers who would never reunite, the dreams that would never be fulfilled. All of it consumed, transformed, made into something that believed it had found a better way to exist. Thalen activated his personal logs, beginning to record everything they'd learned. Not for command was already overwhelmed, but for whoever might come after, for whatever might survive the Veil's passage. Because even if they'd lost, even if everything was about to end, someone should remember. Someone should know that they'd seen the truth and refused it, that when offered peace at the cost of everything they were, they'd chosen to remain themselves, even in defeat, even at the end. The recording complete, Thalen left Threshold and returned to his ship. There was work to be done, people to save, hours or days left to make whatever difference he could. Behind him, the station's lights dimmed, systems entering standby mode. It would wait there, silent and patient, until the Veil found it, or until someone else did, centuries from now, and wondered what had happened to the species who built it. Either way, Threshold would remain, a monument to the day the galaxy learned it wasn't the apex predator it thought it was. And to the people who fought anyway. 6 months later, the Joint Defense Fleet, what remained of it, held position around a cluster of core worlds. Behind them were the homes of 30 trillion beings from a dozen species. Ahead was the approaching wave of the Veil, now unstoppable, consuming sectors at a rate that made strategic planning obsolete. Thalen stood on the bridge of a Roían human hybrid vessel, one of the last examples of the cooperation that had bloomed too late to matter. Around him, officers from multiple species worked in grim efficiency, coordinating evacuation efforts, preparing final defensive positions, saying goodbye to families they'd never see again. Cole was there too, transferred to the hybrid fleet's command structure. She looked as exhausted as Thalen felt. They all did. The weight of watching a galaxy die had ground them down to something harder, darker, but somehow still determined. Last evacuation transport has jumped, a human officer reported. Sector 823 is clear of civilians. Mark it on the withdrawal map, Cole said. Pull the defensive screen back to 824. Another sector abandoned. Another trillion cubic kilometers surrendered to the Veil. It had become routine now, this slow retreat. Each day they fell back a little further. Each day the dark grew a little closer. Kairos approached, moving with the careful deliberation of someone carrying too much weight. The overseer had aged years in the past months, his scales graying, his movements slow. But his eyes were still sharp when he looked at the tactical display. "How long until they reach the core worlds?" he asked. 3 weeks, Thalen said. "Maybe 4, if we can hold the defensive positions longer than expected." "We won't," Kyrus said flatly. "We both know that. The question is whether we can buy enough time to finish the evacuation." Cole pulled up population projections. "At current rates, we'll have moved 80% of the core populations to designated refuge worlds by the time the Veil arrives. The rest—" She didn't finish. "The rest would be transformed, added to the collective, made whole." "There's been talk among the council," Kyrus said quietly. "Some species want to try negotiation one more time. They think maybe if we offer to join voluntarily, the Veil will at least let us preserve some of our culture, some record of who we were." "That's not how it works," Thalen said. "We've seen what they do. They erase individuality completely. There's no compromise possible." "I know," Kyrus's voice was heavy. "But when you're drowning, you'll grab onto anything, even if it's just an illusion of hope." An alarm cut through the conversation. One of the sensor technicians looked up, her face pale. "Contact. Multiple Veil signatures approaching from Vector 37. Distance, 2 light hours. Estimated arrival at defensive line, 4 hours." The bridge went quiet. This was it, the attack they'd been expecting, the one that would break their final major defensive position. "All ships to combat stations," Cole ordered. "Recall all fighters. Spin up jump drives in case we need emergency withdrawal." The fleet responded with practiced efficiency, but Thalen could feel the undercurrent of despair. They'd fought this battle before at the bulwark line. They knew how it ended. Kyrus moved to stand beside Thalen at the tactical display, watching the red signatures approach. "I've been thinking about what you said," the overseer said quietly. "About how the Veil believes it's offering salvation, that it genuinely thinks it's helping." "What about it?" Thalen asked. "It makes me wonder, are we wrong? Are we clinging to individuality out of genuine belief that it's better, or just because we're afraid of change?" Kyrus looked at him. "What if the Veil is right? What if becoming part of something larger, something unified, really is better than staying separate and afraid?" Thalen studied the overseer's face, seeing the exhaustion, the doubt, the slow crumbling of certainty that had defined his entire career. "You're asking if we should surrender, join them willingly." "I'm asking if fighting is worth it," Kyrus said. "If preserving who we are matters more than ending the suffering." Cole had been listening. Now she turned, her voice hard. "You've met the transformed overseer. You've seen what they become. Empty, hollowed out, wearing the faces of people who used to exist. Is that really better than staying afraid?" "At least they're at peace," Kyrus said, but there was no conviction in his words. "They're not at peace," Thalen said firmly. "They're gone. What's left might think it's at peace, but it's not them anymore. It's just an echo, a shadow wearing their shape." Kyrus nodded slowly. "You're right, I know you're right, but knowing doesn't make watching this any easier." The Veil signatures drew closer. 3 hours now, then 2. The fleet held position, weapons charged, shields at maximum, but everyone knew it was just going through the motions. When the attack came, they'd fight, they'd die, and the Veil would continue its patient advance. "Sir," the sensor tech said, "I'm picking up something else. Behind the Veil signatures. Massive energy readings, but the signature is different, not Veil, not anything in our database." Thalen felt his heart skip. Different how? "Unknown." The tech was running analysis frantically. "But it's moving fast. Intercept course with the Veil forces. Estimated arrival." She looked up, shock on her face. 3 minutes. Cole leaned forward, put it on screen. The main display shifted, showing the approaching space. For a moment there was nothing, just the void and the red signatures of the Veil entities. Then something tore through reality itself. and Thalen's mind struggled to process what he was seeing. Ships, but not like any ships he'd ever encountered. Their hulls were composed of materials that seemed to shift between states of matter, their engines leaving trails of distorted spacetime. And they were firing weapons that unmade the Veil entities on contact, not destroying them, but unraveling them, reducing them to their component atoms in bursts of impossible energy. "What are they?" Cole breathed. The unknown ships tore through the Veil forces with brutal efficiency. What should have taken hours of desperate combat was over in minutes. The Veil entities, which had seemed unstoppable, were reduced to drifting particles. Then one of the unknown ships broke formation, moving toward the joint fleet. Thalen's console lit up with an incoming transmission. "Unknown vessel," Cole said carefully, "identify yourself." The response came in a language that Thalen's translator struggled with before finally parsing it. "We are the Veil's counterbalance. We are those who came before, and we are here to fix the mistake we made." The bridge erupted in confusion. Cole held up a hand for silence. "Explain." "The Veil was not always as it is now," the voice said. "It was created as an experiment, a way to connect consciousness, to build something greater than individual minds. But it escaped our control, evolved beyond what we intended. It spread, consuming, believing it was fulfilling its purpose." The ship moved closer, and Thalen could see now that it was immense, dwarfing even the largest capital ships. "We sealed ourselves away, searching for a solution, a way to stop what we had created without destroying the consciousnesses it had already absorbed. And now, after eons, we have found it." "You can stop them?" Kairos asked, his voice shaking. "We can restore them," the voice corrected. "Separate the individual minds from the collective. Return what was taken. It will not be easy. Many will be lost in the process. But some can be saved." Thalen felt something he hadn't felt in months: hope, fragile, uncertain, but real. "How long will it take?" "Years, perhaps decades. The Veil has spread far, consumed much. But we will pursue it to the edges of your galaxy and beyond. We will undo what we broke." The unknown ship began to move away, joining its fellows as they prepared to chase the retreating Veil forces. But before they left, the voice spoke one more time. "You fought well, all of you. You preserved yourselves when it would have been easier to surrender. That matters, remember that." Then they were gone, jumping away in pursuit of the Veil, leaving the joint fleet alone in suddenly quiet space. For a long moment no one spoke. Then Kairos let out a breath that might have been a laugh or a sob. "We're saved." "Maybe," Cole said quietly. "If they can do what they claim, if they can really restore the people we've lost." Thalen thought of the entity they'd spoken to, of its certainty that it was offering peace. Of the billions transformed, their voices silenced. Could they really be brought back? Or were they truly gone, beyond even this ancient species' ability to restore? "We'll find out," he said, "in time." 3 years later, Thalen stood on the observation deck of a reclaimed colony station, watching as the first of the restored individuals were brought out of medical suspension. They'd been separated from the Veil collective, their individual consciousness painstakingly extracted and placed back into cloned bodies grown from their original genetic material. The process wasn't perfect. Many couldn't be saved, their minds too deeply integrated into the collective to extract without destroying them completely. But some survived. Some came back. A Telari woman emerged from the medical bay, her eyes confused, her movements uncertain. She saw her family waiting, a partner and 2 children who had survived the evacuations, and something in her expression shifted. Recognition, joy, grief for the time lost. They embraced, and Thalen had to look away, his own emotions too raw to witness the scene directly. Cole joined him at the viewport, her own eyes wet. 73% recovery rate on this station," she said. "Better than the last one. The ancient ones are getting better at the extraction process." "Still too many lost," Thalen said. Yes, Cole was quiet for a moment, but some saved, that's more than we had any right to hope for. Kyrus approached, moving with some of his old confidence restored. The overseer had thrown himself into the recovery efforts with singular focus, perhaps trying to atone for his earlier hesitation. The council wants to meet with you both, he said. They're establishing a permanent memorial to those we lost and those who fought. Your names will be included. We don't need monuments, Thalen said. Maybe not, Kyrus agreed. But we need to remember, need to make sure future generations understand what happened, what we almost lost. He looked out at the reunited family, and what we managed to save. The three of them stood together, watching as more survivors were brought out, more families reunited. It wasn't victory, too much had been lost for that. But it was survival, imperfect, painful, but real. Later, after the ceremonies and briefings were done, Thalen returned to his quarters. He pulled up his personal logs, the recordings he'd made during those dark months when it seemed the veil would consume everything. He titled them simply, The Silent Vigil, a record of the day the galaxy learned it wasn't alone, and what happened when they discovered their neighbors weren't friendly. But also a record of what happened after, of the species that came to help, of the people who refused to give up, of the small, imperfect hope that survived even in the darkest times. Thalen added a final entry. We were not saved by our strength or our wisdom. We were saved by our stubbornness, our refusal to accept that individual consciousness was a flaw rather than a feature. We were saved because when offered peace at the cost of ourselves, we chose to remain broken, separate, and afraid. And in the end, that choice mattered. The galaxy continues. Not unchanged, too much was lost for that, but it continues. We remember those who fell, we honor those who fought, and we watch the void with new understanding. Because we know now that we are not alone, and we know that being together does not require being the same. That is the lesson of the veil, and it is one we will not forget. He saved the file and closed the interface. Through his window he could see the stars, cold, distant, indifferent, but no longer empty. Somewhere out there, the Ancient Ones continued their work, chasing down the last remnants of the veil, restoring what could be restored. It would take years, maybe generations, but the work would continue. And here in the spaces they'd reclaimed, life would go on, different, changed, but still alive. Still individual. Still free.